The morning had started like any other patrol in the godforsaken mountains of Kandahar province. Sergeant Jake Morrison adjusted his helmet strap and checked his watch 0847 hours. His 8-man squad moved through the abandoned village of Kalaina in a standard diamond formation, their boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. The intelligence briefing had been routine. Investigate reports of weapons caches, assess civilian activity, return to base by 1400 hours. Morrison had done this dance 100 times before. "Feels too quiet, Sarge," whispered Private First Class Danny Chun, his M4 carbine sweeping the empty doorways. The kid was barely 19, but his instincts were sharp. Morrison had learned to trust those instincts. "Always feels quiet until it doesn't," Morrison replied. But he felt it too, that electric tension in the air that made the hair on his neck stand up. The village was too empty, too perfect. No children playing in the dust, no women hanging laundry, no old men smoking in the shade. Even the dogs were gone. Corporal Mike Hayes, Morrison's second-in-command and best friend since basic training, moved up beside him. Intel said this place was cleared 3 days ago. Looks like it's been empty for weeks. Hayes had a wife and twin daughters back in Ohio. He carried their picture in his helmet band. And Morrison could see him touching it now. Nervous habit that meant trouble. The squad spread out across the village square. A dusty expanse surrounded by mud brick buildings with flat roofs and narrow windows. Morrison's radio crackled with routine check-ins from other units operating in the area. Everything seemed normal. Everything felt wrong. "Movement. Second floor, building at 2 o'clock, reported Specialist Rodriguez from the rear guard. Morrison swung his rifle toward the structure, a 2-story house with faded blue shutters. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a shadow shifted behind a window. "Could be civilians," Hayes suggested, but his weapon was already trained on the building. Morrison keyed his radio. "Base, this is Alpha 7. We have possible civilian contact in the village. Requesting guidance on rules of engagement." Static answered him. Then more static. "Base Alpha 7, do you copy?" Nothing. Chun's voice cut through the silence, sharp with alarm. "Sarge, I've got movement on the rooftops. Multiple contacts." Morrison's blood turned to ice water. He spun around, scanning the buildings that surrounded them. Dark shapes moved along the roof lines, men with weapons, lots of them. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They weren't investigating a weapons cache. They were the weapons cache. "It's a trap!" Morrison shouted. "Take cover. Take cover now." The world exploded. Muzzle flashes erupted from every direction as automatic weapons fire raked the square. Bullets whined off the stone walls and kicked up geysers of dust around Morrison's boots. He dove behind a low wall as his squad scattered, each man finding whatever cover he could in the killing field they'd walked into. "Contact! Contact! We are taking heavy fire." Morrison screamed into his radio, but only static answered. They were jamming communications. This wasn't some random ambush. This was planned, coordinated. Professional. Hayes made it to cover behind an overturned cart, but Morrison could see blood spreading across his uniform. "Hayes, you hit?" "Took one in the shoulder." Hayes called back, his voice tight with pain. "I'm still in the fight." The enemy fire was devastating and precise. Morrison counted muzzle flashes, at least 20 hostiles, maybe more, positioned on rooftops and in windows with overlapping fields of fire. His squad was trapped in the center of the square with minimal cover, exactly where the enemy wanted them. Private Chun was pinned behind a pile of rubble, his face pale with terror. "Sarge, I can't move. They've got me zeroed." Specialist Rodriguez tried to make it to better cover, but stumbled as bullets chewed up the ground around his feet. He rolled behind a concrete barrier, clutching his leg. "I'm hit. Leg's torn up bad." Morrison's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered at least 3-1, caught in a prepared kill zone with no backup and no communications. His ammunition counter showed 32 rounds, not nearly enough for a sustained firefight. The enemy had the high ground, superior numbers, and all the time in the world. "Alpha Team, sound off!" Morrison shouted over the gunfire. Chun, operational. Rodriguez, wounded but fighting. Hayes, wounded but operational. Jackson, good to go. That was their medic, crouched behind a stone well in the center of the square. Williams, operational. Their machine gunner was set up behind a low wall, his M249 chattering back at the enemy positions. Torres, operational. Murphy, good. Their youngest soldier, barely 18, was pressed against the doorway, his rifle shaking in his hands. 8 men against an army. Morrison had been in bad situations before, but nothing like this. The enemy fire was so intense that dust and debris filled the air like a sandstorm. Every time one of his men tried to move, bullets drove them back to cover. Hayes keyed his radio with his good on. Any station. This is Alpha 7. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and medical evacuation. Static. Morrison checked his watch. 0851 hours. They'd been in the kill zone for 4 minutes, and it felt like 4 hours. His ammunition was down to 28 rounds. Williams' machine gun fell silent, either out of ammo or the gunner was down. Williams! Status. Guns jammed. Working on it. A new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whine of an RPG. Morrison looked up to see a rocket-propelled grenade streaking toward their position. RPG, get down! The explosion shattered the stone wall where Chun had been taking cover, showering the square with debris. Through the smoke and dust, Morrison saw Chun stumbling, blood streaming down his face from shrapnel wounds. Chun's hurt bad. Jackson called out. The medic tried to reach the wounded soldier, but enemy fire drove him back. Morrison's radio suddenly crackled to life, not with friendly voices, but with enemy communications in a language he didn't recognize. They were coordinating, tightening the noose. He could hear vehicles approaching from the north reinforcements. Hayes crawled over to Morrison's position, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. His face was gray with shock and pain. "Jake," he whispered, using Morrison's first name for the first time in months. "We're not getting out of this one." Morrison looked at his friend, his brother, and saw the truth in his eyes. They were going to die in this dusty square. 8 American soldiers cut down in a perfectly executed ambush. Their families would get folded flags and empty promises. Their names would be carved into black granite walls, but not without a fight. Morrison checked his ammunition. One more time, 24 rounds left. Around the square, his men were running low on everything except courage. The enemy fire was intensifying, and he could hear boots on rooftops as they moved to better positions. Hayes grabbed Morrison's arm with his good hand, his grip weak but desperate. "They're going to overrun us in 60 seconds, he whispered, blood flecking his lips. "Whatever you're going to do it now." Morrison looked up at the mountains surrounding the village, their peaks lost in the morning haze. Somewhere up there, he hoped, someone was watching. Someone who could help. Someone who gave a damn about 8 American soldiers about to make their last stand in a forgotten village in a forgotten war. The enemy fire reached a crescendo, and Morrison knew Hayes was right. 60 seconds, maybe less. Then the mountains spoke. Captain Sarah Ghost Reeves had been watching the village through her scope for 17 minutes when the shooting started. She lay prone on a rocky outcrop 1,200 meters above the valley floor, her ghillie suit blending perfectly with the sun-bleached stone and scrub brush. The Barrett MA2A1 rifle beneath her was a precision instrument of death. Its .50 caliber rounds, capable of punching through engine blocks at this range, but she was down to her last bullet. 3 weeks ago, Reeves had been inserted into these mountains with a simple mission: locate and eliminate a high-value target known as the Chemist, a bomb maker responsible for 17 IDE attacks that had killed 32 coalition soldiers. Intelligence suggested he was operating from this region, moving between villages and using the local population as human shields. What intelligence hadn't mentioned was that the Chemist had an army. Reeves had been tracking his network for 21 days, moving like a ghost through the mountains, living on energy bars and rainwater collected in her poncho. She'd taken out 6 of his lieutenants with surgical precision, 1 shot, 1 kill, then disappear before anyone knew where the bullet came from. Each kill had brought her closer to the Chemist himself. Yesterday, she'd finally found him. Through her scope, she'd watched him enter the village of Calayino with a convoy of fighters. He was planning something big. She could see them unloading crates of explosives and positioning weapons on the rooftops. But before she could take the shot, a sandstorm had rolled in, forcing her to take shelter in a cave system higher up the mountain. When the storm cleared this morning, the Chemist was gone. But his men remained, and now Reeves understood why. They weren't just hiding in the village, they were turning it into a trap. She'd watched through her scope as the American patrol approached. 8 soldiers moving in standard formation across the valley floor. A radio was tuned to their frequency, and she'd heard their casual chatter, their routine check-ins. They had no idea they were walking into a slaughter. Reeves had tried to warn them. She'd keyed her radio and attempted to break into their communications, but the enemy was jamming all frequencies. She could only watch in growing horror as the soldiers entered the village square, completely unaware of the dozens of fires positioned around them. When the ambush began, Reeves felt each muzzle flash like a physical blow. She'd been a sniper for 8 years, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. She'd seen good soldiers die before, but never like this, never when she was close enough to help but powerless to act. Through her scope, she could see the American soldiers trapped in the kill zone. One was already wounded, blood spreading across his uniform as he tried to return fire. Another was pinned behind inadequate cover, bullets chewing up the stone around him. Their sergeant, she could tell by the way he moved. The way the others looked to him was trying to coordinate a defense. But it was hopeless. Reeves counted the enemy positions. 23 fighters that she could see, probably more in the buildings. They had the Americans surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from support. It would be over in minutes. She chambered her last round of .50 caliber, armor-piercing incendiary that she'd been saving for the Chemist himself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 weeks hunting one man, and now she had to choose between completing her mission and saving 8 American lives. It wasn't really a choice at all. Reeves studied the tactical situation through her scope, her mind automatically calculating ranges, wind speed, and target priorities. The enemy machine gun position on the north rooftop was doing the most damage. If she could take that out, it might give the Americans a chance to reposition. But even with her .50 caliber round, one shot wouldn't be enough to break the ambush. She needed something bigger. Scanning the village through her scope, Reeves spotted movement near the eastern edge, a technical truck with a mounted machine gun racing toward the square. But it wasn't the truck that caught her attention. It was what was following it, a fuel tanker. Its bloated tank swaying as it navigated the narrow streets. A plan began forming in her mind, desperate. Probably impossible, but their only chance. The fuel tanker was moving toward a position behind the main enemy force, probably to refuel vehicles for a pursuit if any Americans managed to escape. If she could hit that tanker with her incendiary round, the explosion would create chaos in the enemy ranks. It might give the trapped soldiers the opening they needed, but the shot was a nightmare. The tanker was 847 meters away, well within her rifle's effective range, but moving through narrow streets with buildings on both sides. She'd have to thread the bullet between a radio antenna and a power line, account for the vehicle's movement, and compensate for the swirling mountain winds that could push her round off target by several feet, and she'd have exactly one chance. Reeves adjusted her scope and began her calculations. Wind speed, gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the northwest. Target speed, approximately 15 miles per hour. Lead time, 1.2 seconds. Elevation adjustment, down 847 meters with a 23-degree angle. Through her earpiece, she could hear the American radio chatter panicked voices calling for support that wasn't coming. Wounded men trying to stay in the fight. A sergeant trying to hold his squad together as their world collapsed around them. Any station, this is Alpha 7. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and medical evacuation. Only static answered. Reeves keyed her radio, switching to the American's frequency. Alpha 7, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on your position. Stay down and be ready to move on my signal. The response came immediately, the sergeant's voice tight with desperation. Overwatch Alpha 7. Who is this? What's your position? Call me Ghost, Reeves replied, settling into her firing position. I'm the cavalry. Through her scope, she could see the fuel tanker approaching the optimal position. In 30 seconds, it would be directly behind the main enemy force. The shot window would last maybe 3 seconds before the vehicle moved behind cover. Reeves controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the zone, that almost meditative state, where the world narrowed to nothing but the crosshairs and the target. She'd made impossible shots before, but never with so much riding on a single bullet. The tanker rounded the corner, moving into her kill zone. Reeves tracked it through her scope, leading the target, compensating for wind and gravity and the 1,000 variables that could turn a perfect shot into a miss. Ghost, whatever you're planning, do it fast. The American sergeant's voice crackled through her earpiece. They're massing for a final assault. Reeves could see it, 2 enemy fighters moving into position for the killing blow. In the square below, the Americans were down to their last magazines, their last moments. The fuel tanker was in position. Reeves took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began her trigger squeeze. The crosshairs settled on the tanker's fuel tank, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. Impossible is just another word for Tuesday, she whispered, and pulled the trigger. The Barrett roared, its muzzle blast echoing across the mountains like thunder. The .50 caliber round streaked across the valley, a messenger of salvation traveling at 2,800 feet per second toward its distant target, for a heartbeat that lasted forever. The world held its breath. Then the fuel tanker erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the morning sky. The explosion painted the morning sky orange and black, a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke that rose above the village like the wrath of God himself. The fuel tanker had become a miniature sun, its death throes sending shockwaves through the narrow streets and rattling windows 3 blocks away. But Captain Sarah Reeves wasn't watching the fireworks. She was already working the bolt of her Barrett, ejecting the spent casing and scanning for her next target through the chaos below. The explosion had bought the Americans precious seconds, but seconds were all they had. Through her scope, she watched enemy fighters stumbling away from the blast zone, their clothes singed, their formation shattered. Some were on fire, rolling in the dust to extinguish the flames that clung to their skin. Others lay motionless, victims of flying debris and the crushing overpressure that had turned their internal organs to jelly. But not all of them were down. Ghost. Ghost, that was beautiful. Sergeant Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece, electric with desperate hope. We're moving to better positions. Reeves watched the American squad emerge from cover like desert flowers after rain. They moved with the fluid precision of professional soldiers, bounding from position to position while their teammates provided covering fire. Morrison was in the lead, his rifle chattering as he laid down suppressive fire on a rooftop position. Behind him, the wounded Corporal Hayes, according to the radio chatter, was moving despite the blood soaking his uniform. But Reeves could see what the Americans couldn't from their position in the square. The explosion had scattered the enemy, not destroyed them. And now they were regrouping with the cold efficiency of seasoned fighters. "Alpha 7, this is Ghost," she transmitted, her voice calm despite the tactical nightmare unfolding below. "You've got multiple contacts repositioning on your flanks. Building at your 2 o'clock, 12 hostiles. Rooftop at your 10 o'clock, 8 more. Copy, Ghost. We see them." But seeing them and dealing with them were two different things. Morrison's squad was still outnumbered 3-1, and they were running critically low on ammunition. Reeves could see it in the way they moved, shorter bursts of fire, longer pauses between shots. They were rationing bullets like water in the desert, and she was completely out. Reeves opened her ammunition pouch and stared at the empty interior, as if willing more rounds to materialize. She'd started this mission with 24.50 caliber rounds. 23 had found their targets over the past 3 weeks. The 24th had just turned a fuel tanker into scrap metal and bought 8 American soldiers. A few more minutes of life. Now she was down to her sidearm, a 6-hour P226 with 2 15-round magazines. 30 rounds of 9mm ammunition against an army of fighters armed with assault rifles and machine guns. At 1,200 meters distance, her pistol was about as useful as throwing rocks. She needed to get closer. Much closer. Reeves began breaking down her sniper position with practiced efficiency, collapsing the bipod and slinging the Barrett across her back. The rifle was useless without ammunition, but she couldn't abandon it. Too much intelligence value if it fell into enemy hands. She'd have to carry the extra weight. The route down the mountain was treacherous, loose scree and hidden crevices that could snap an ankle or send her tumbling into the valley below. But Reeves had spent 3 weeks learning every rock and shadow on this mountainside. She moved like a ghost, her ghillie suit helping her blend with the terrain as she picked her way down ancient goat paths and natural ledges. Through her earpiece, she could hear the battle intensifying. Morrison's voice, tight with strain. "Williams is down." "Repeat, Williams is down." "How bad?" That was Hayes, the wounded corporal who should have been evacuated hours ago, but was still fighting. "He's breathing, but he's out of the fight. Took shrapnel to the chest." Reeves cursed under her breath and increased her pace, half sliding down a steep section of loose rock. Williams was their machine gunner. Losing him meant losing their heaviest firepower. The tactical balance was shifting back toward the enemy. "Ghost, this is Alpha 7. Morrison's voice crackled through the static. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Can you give us another miracle?" Reeves keyed her radio while navigating around a boulder the size of a small car. "Working on it, Alpha 7. Keep your heads down." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. There would be no more miracles. No more impossible shots that turned the tide of battle. She was down to close-quarters combat with a pistol against an enemy force that had them surrounded and outgunned. The mathematics of the situation were brutal and simple. 8 wounded Americans with limited ammunition versus 20-plus enemy fighters in prepared positions, without air support or reinforcements. Morrison's squad had maybe 10 minutes before they were overrun. Unless she could change the equation, Reeves reached a ledge about 400 meters above the village and paused to assess the tactical situation. From this angle, she could see the enemy's deployment more clearly. They'd recovered from the fuel tanker explosion faster than she'd hoped. and they were moving to tighten the noose around the blunt Americans. But she could also see something else, something that made her pulse quicken with possibility. The enemy commander had positioned himself in a two-story building on the Valor eastern edge of the village, using the upper floor as an observation post to coordinate the attack. Through the windows, Reeves could see him gesturing to his fighters, directing their movements with hand signals and radio commands. Take out the commander, and the enemy force would lose coordination. They might scatter, or at least hesitate long enough for the Americans to break contact and escape. But the building was 400 meters away, and she only had her sidearm. Even if she could somehow get close enough for an effective pistol shot, she'd have to fight through multiple enemy positions to reach the target. It was suicide. Pure and simple. Reeves smiled grimly and continued her descent. She'd been called Ghost for 8 years. Ever since her first tour in Iraq, when she'd infiltrated a terrorist compound and eliminated 6 targets without anyone knowing she'd been there. The name had stuck because of her ability to appear and disappear like smoke, to strike from the shadows and vanish before the enemy knew what hit them. Today, she was going to earn that name all over again. The route to the village required crossing 200 meters of open ground, a tabas, killing field where any movement would draw immediate fire. But Reeves had noticed something during her weeks of observation, a dry creek bed that ran along the northern edge of the village, hidden from most of the enemy positions by a low ridge. If she could reach that creek bed, she could move within pistol range of the command building. It would still be a long shot with a handgun, but at least it would be possible. Alpha 7, this is Ghost, she transmitted, checking her pistol and spare magazines. I'm moving to a new position. Give me 5 minutes, then create a distraction on the south side of the village. Ghost, what's your plan? Reeves looked down at the village where 8 American soldiers were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. She thought about her mission. The chemist was still out there, still building bombs, still killing coalition soldiers. Abandoning her hunt to save these men would mean letting a high-value target escape. But some things mattered more than missions. I'm going to introduce myself to their commanding officer, she replied, and began her final descent toward the Valley of Death. Captain Sarah Reeves moved through the dry creek bed like death incarnate, her ghillie suit blending with the shadows and debris that lined the ancient watercourse. The creek hadn't seen water in months, leaving behind a maze of smooth stones and twisted driftwood that provided perfect concealment for her approach. Above her, the battle raged with increasing intensity. Morrison's squad had created the distraction she'd requested, a concentrated assault on the southern enemy positions that drew attention away from her infiltration route. Through her earpiece, she could hear the controlled chaos of professional soldiers fighting for their lives. Chun, lay down suppressing fire on that rooftop. I'm down to my last magazine, Sarge. Make it count. Reeves checked her watch. She'd been moving for 4 minutes, covering nearly 300 meters of treacherous terrain without being detected. The enemy command building was now only 100 meters away, its second-story windows clearly visible through the sparse vegetation that lined the creek bank. She could see the commander through her binoculars, a tall man with a graying beard, wearing a distinctive red headband that marked him as a senior leader. He was speaking rapidly into a radio while pointing toward Morrison's position, coordinating what looked like a final assault. Reeves drew her Sig Sauer and checked the chamber. 15 rounds of 9mm ammunition. At this range, she'd need to be perfect. No room for warning shots or suppressive fire. Every bullet had to count. The creek bed ended about 50 meters from the building, leaving a stretch of open ground that she'd have to cross to get within effective pistol range. It was a death trap. The moment she left cover, every enemy fighter in the village would have a clear shot at her. But as she studied the terrain, Reeves noticed something that made her smile grimly. The building's ground floor was partially collapsed, its walls reduced to rubble by years of warfare. If she could reach that debris field, she could use it as cover to get close enough for a killing shot. "Alpha 7, this is Ghost," she whispered into her radio. "I'm in position. When I give the signal, hit them with everything you've got. Make them think you're trying to break out to the north." "Copy. Ghost, we're ready." Reeves took a deep breath and sprinted from the creek bed, her boots pounding across the open ground as she raced toward the collapsed building. Behind her, she could hear shouts in Arabic as enemy fighters spotted her movement. Bullets whined past her head, kicking up geysers of dust around her feet. An AK-47 chattered from a nearby rooftop, its round stitching a line of destruction just inches from her path. Reeves dove and rolled, using every piece of cover she could find: an overturned cart, a pile of rubble, the burned-out shell of a motorcycle. She reached the building's debris field just as a grenade exploded where she'd been standing moments before. Shrapnel peppered the stones around her, but she was already moving, weaving through the maze of collapsed walls and twisted metal that had once been someone's home. "Now!" she shouted into her radio. Morrison's squad erupted in a symphony of gunfire, their remaining ammunition concentrated on the northern enemy positions. Tracers streaked across the village square as the Americans sold the deception, making it look like they were attempting a desperate breakout. The enemy commander took the bait. Through the second-story window, Reeves could see him turning toward the new threat, barking orders into his radio. His attention was focused entirely on the American squad, leaving his back exposed to the ghost who had materialized in his own backyard. Reeves found a firing position behind a chunk of concrete and raised her pistol. The range was 40 meters long for a handgun, but manageable for someone with her training. She could see the commander clearly through the window, his profile sharp against the morning light. But as she lined up the shot, movement in her peripheral vision made her freeze. 3 enemy fighters were moving through the ground floor of the building, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning for threats. They hadn't seen her yet, but they would in seconds. Reeves had a choice: take the shot at the commander and alert the fighters to her position, or deal with the immediate threat and lose her chance at the primary target. The decision was made for her when one of the fighters spotted her muzzle protruding from behind the concrete. He shouted a warning and swung his AK-47 toward her position. Reeves moved like lightning, her pistol tracking to the new threat. She double-tapped the first fighter 2-round center mass that dropped him instantly. The second fighter was already firing, his bullets chipping concrete inches from her head. She rolled left and put 3 rounds into his chest, watching him crumple against a pile of rubble. The third fighter had taken cover behind a support beam and was trying to flank her position. Reeves could hear his boots crunching on debris as he moved, but she couldn't see him through the maze of collapsed walls. Above her, the commander had heard the gunfire and was shouting new orders. She could hear boots on the stairs as reinforcements rushed to investigate the disturbance. In seconds, the building would be swarming with enemy fighters. Reeves made her decision. She broke from cover and sprinted toward the staircase, her pistol leading the way. The third fighter emerged from behind his cover just as she reached the stairs, his rifle swinging toward her. She put 2 rounds in his forehead without breaking stride. The staircase was a nightmare of broken wood and twisted metal. But Reeves climbed it like a mountain goat, her training and adrenaline carrying her upward. She could hear the commander above, still barking orders, still unaware that death was climbing toward him. She reached the second floor just as 2 more fighters appeared at the top of the stairs. The first one died before he could raise his weapon, Reeves' bullets punching through his chest and spinning him into the wall. The second managed to get off a burst from his AK-47, but his shots went wide as Reeves' return fire caught him in the throat. The commander was in the next room, his voice growing louder as he coordinated the final assault on Morrison's position. Through the doorway, Reeves could see him standing at the window, his radio in one hand, a pistol in the other. She had 4 rounds left. Reeves stepped into the doorway. Her Sig Sauer trained on the commander's back. "Drop the radio," she said in Arabic. The commander spun around, his eyes widening as he saw the ghost who had materialized in his command post. For a moment, they stared at each other across the room. The American sniper who had hunted his network for 3 weeks, and the terrorist leader who had orchestrated the ambush below. "You," he whispered, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The one they call Ghost." "That's right," Reeves replied. "And you're the one they call dead." The commander's hand moved toward his pistol. Reeves put 2 rounds in his chest before he could clear leather, watching him collapse against the window frame. His radio clattered to the floor, its speaker crackling with confused voices as his fighters tried to understand why their orders had suddenly stopped. Through the window, Reeves could see the immediate effect of the commander's death. The coordinated assault on Morrison's position faltered as individual fighters hesitated, unsure of their orders. Some began falling back, while others held their positions but stopped advancing. Reeves keyed her radio. "Alpha 7, this is Ghost. The head of the snake is dead. You got a window move now." "Copy, Ghost." "We're moving." She watched through the window as Morrison's squad emerged from cover, their movements coordinated and purposeful. They bounded from position to position, using the enemy's confusion to break contact and move toward the extraction point. But the respite was temporary. Already, she could hear new voices on the enemy radio, lieutenants trying to restore order, fighters regrouping for a renewed assault. The Americans had minutes, maybe less, before the enemy reorganized. Reeves picked up the commander's AK-47 and checked the magazine, 30 rounds of 7.62 millimeters ammunition. She smiled grimly and moved to the window, her rifle trained on the enemy positions below. "Alpha 7, this is Ghost," she transmitted. "I've got overwatch. Keep moving, I'll cover your withdrawal." The hunt for the chemist would have to wait. Today, she had a different mission, getting 8 American heroes home alive. And Captain Sarah "Ghost" Reeves never failed a mission.